Alright, this is gonna be the first video that I put up on my new YouTube channel I started, Jesus Gives You Balls, and I figured I would get into the science to show that God exists. Because that's the new thing that's out there, right? Trust the science. Trust the science. Alright then, well, trust the science. Stop going by your emotions and what you want and your own lusts, and trust the science. So that's what we're going to get into. It may take a little bit to really unfold the picture that I am presenting here, so bear with me. We're going to take baby steps here, because I know a lot of you need some detail and things explained to them, like what science actually is. Because science today, a lot of times, wants to get you not to trust yourself and your senses. And that doesn't make any sense, because science is being able to actually trust your senses, because you have to be able to observe, which is using your eyes, and do experiments to observe what happens, and to be able to repeat the experiment and observe what happens to see that it's consistent. If you keep doing the same experiment, you keep getting the same result. And if you change things, you can see that you get a different result consistently. And that's where you get science. It's something you can observe, test, and reobserve. So if you can't trust your eyes, your senses, then science is useless. You can just make up whatever you want. It becomes speculation and imagination, because you can't trust your senses, so we'll just make up whatever we feel like making up. And that's illogical, unreasonable, and obviously not true, because then you're going to get everybody making up what they want, and they're going to have contradictions. So we need to lay that foundation, science. We have to trust what God actually gave us, our brains, our senses. And yes, some people do have issues with that, but generally speaking, we don't. So if you want to go to some side argument like that, you're just being silly. You're just trying to find anything you can to dismiss the foundation here. So you can go ahead and have fun with that. But anybody who, they got some reason to them, I hope you continue to follow along here and actually trust the science. Now, I'm going to be going through tabs because it triggers the points that I want to talk about. It gives me a train of thought. It reminds me of what I want to talk about. It gives me a little bit of structure for my videos. The pictures that come up, they may have nothing to do with what I want to actually talk about. Like, what is this? We trust. There's weird things that come up, but it's just more for something for you to look at and entertainment for you, because I don't really provide a lot of entertainment and flashing colors and graphics for my videos. I just talk and talk sense. So that's what I'm going to do. So anyway, I think I'll stop here because that looks funny. I like that. So yeah. The first thing I want to do is trigger a couple of thoughts, something to meditate on. And this is just the pictures that came up here for why does anything exist at all? Just think about that. I'm not expecting an answer, but it's just like, why does anything exist? Right? That is messed up. Why doesn't nothing exist? Because the science talks about how things always find the easiest path, the easiest way, right? The path of least resistance. Well, it seems like the path of least resistance is absolutely nothing. There's actual heat death. There's actually no life at all. That's the simplest, easiest thing, right? Yet here we are. Things exist. And not only that, they exist the way they do. Why do things not only exist, but why do they exist this way? Is it really just random? Because everything seems to be set up quite well for things to survive and thrive. And so it's interesting. Very interesting. But yeah, just something there to think about, meditate on. We'll move on here to DNA. This is interesting stuff. Now, every living creature has DNA. It's the instructions on how to build the actual living being, whether it's you, a dog, a tree, or a fly. It has DNA and it tells the cells how to build you. It's like a blueprint, instructions, however you want to put it. It lets the cells know how to build what it is it's building, right? Real simple. Now, the interesting thing is using science when we look at DNA is that through reproduction, we see that there is only a scrambling of information and a loss of information, but there's never an addition. What do I mean by that? Well, you see how there's a base pair here. It's like a purplish blue with a yellow, and then there's a light blue with an orange, right? So we got 1, 2, 3 base pairs, and it looks like there might be 2 here, and then you got 3 more, right? So in this picture, let's just count the ones we can see. We got 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21, right? Okay, we got 21 base pairs right here, right? So let's just say this is the first life form. It has 21 base pairs in its DNA. That's the instructions on how to make this creature. It's very simple because humans have billions of base pairs. This creature is super simple. What it is, I don't know. But let's just, for the sake of explaining this creature has 21 base pairs. So when this creature mates, the child is only going to have 21 base pairs in its DNA or less. That's what we observed with science, such as breeding dogs from wolf, is that the information in the DNA is either scrambled up, so you got the 21 base pairs, but they're changed up a little bit, or these 3 are shut off, so it has a different function, or these ones are not usually on, but these ones are turned on now, something like that. And sometimes there's a loss of information, like all 3 of these ones are gone, right? And you got something that science would call like a speciation. It's a little bit different, or it's not vastly different. Like a lot of the dogs, they all look different, and they're different in a lot of ways because of this breeding and genetic manipulation. But they can still breed with one another. But the thing is that you cannot reverse the process. What that means is you cannot take a bunch of dogs and breed them back into a wolf. You can't even take the dogs and breed them with wolves and just eventually get wolves again, because there's a loss of information. Because there's some horses that I think that they have 38 chromosomes, which contain the DNA, and there's a breed that has, I think, 36 chromosomes. And when they mate, the offspring will have 37 chromosomes, right? So they'll be like, look, it's an addition from 36 to 37. But they ignore that it's a 38 to 37, right? That's a loss of information. they act as if it's a gain, and it's like, no, it's actually a loss, because let's say that 38 chromosomes is the wolf, and the 36 is a dog. You're trying to breed the dog back into the wolf? Well, you can only get to 36 by mixing it with a wolf. I mean, to 37. You can't get it to 38. And then if you actually mate uh, that breed that has 37 with a breed that has 38, you're only going to get 37 and a half. You're always going to be just short of 38, and you're never going to get above 38. Just as though the parents that have 21 chromosomes in this creature, the children are never going to get above. And you may be saying mutations. All right, let's bring up mutations. Now and then, there's copies, right? So the children, an error happens where this part is duplicated and it's also put into here, right? So this section is spliced and put into here. So now this creature has 24 base pairs. It had added it, the mutation. Look, new things are added, new information. It's copied. Well, using science, whenever this happens, the creature's actually harmed. With the chromosomes, you get the extra chromosome with a human. Somebody has Down syndrome. You get a copying of information in the DNA. You get crippling defects. There's no beneficial mutation ever. If you add things to it, it falls apart. It can still work when you remove things, but never when you add. And things will work differently. Like when you have bacteria that end up becoming immune to certain medications, right? Well, what ends up happening with that bacteria is that it has receptors that the medicine is able to grasp onto and then kill that bacteria. Well, what happens is the bacteria adapts and loses information to create that receptor that the medicine can actually attach to. So it loses information. It doesn't gain new information and become stronger. It actually becomes weaker by losing information. It's kind of like people are coming in and they're handcuffing everybody, but you don't have, your genetic information was ruined and you don't have any arms. So it's beneficial that you're not getting handcuffed and you can run away because you don't have arms anyway. But ultimately that's not beneficial at all. You actually lost information that's actually very useful. Kind of like you can live without your ears, your legs, your arms, and a lot of organs, but it's it's not so much a living. You can lose your eyes, your nose, your tongue too. But nothing beneficial about losing information. But when you add things, that's when things just get all jacked up. And you could take it as this is the truth. The DNA is truth. And when you add in lies, it just totally messes everything up. It turns it into some bullshit. Just mess. But if you remove some truth, like you remove these 6 pieces here of truth, the rest of it is still truth. It's just not all the truth that it, ultimately did have, right? So it could still work because this is still true. It's just missing part of the truth that it used to have. So if you see it like that, that's another way to grasp this. So the point being here is that if this first life form only had 21 base pairs of DNA, how in the hell let's say this is a fish, right? How can a life form with 21 base pairs in the DNA create life forms like humans that have billions of base pairs in the DNA with scrambling 21 or losing 21, cutting away pieces? How do you get to billions? Think about that. It makes no sense. It's not scientific. It's imagination, it's speculation, it's bullshit. Like, oh, it happened billions of years ago, over time. That's not science. That you can't observe that. You can't test that. You can't observe the results of the experiments. That's imagination. It's speculation. That's not science. It's not real. They just teach it to you as children because you don't know this. You can't think that way. So, how can you go take 21 base pairs? You can't add to it, but you can take away from it. How do you get to billions? How do you even get to 100 if you can't add to 21? You explain that to me. Ah, but you studied this a bit. You know about yeast. I'm going to get into that because there might be one of you who actually knows about what they did with yeast. There's this yeast germ, and what they did is they took some DNA information that would allow the yeast to digest something else, a new protein or a new food source. So they took it and they spliced it into some of these wheat germ, right? Or yeast germ, I mean, my bad. And they noticed that it actually worked. The yeast was able to digest something else. I think that's what it was able to do, digest something new. Don't quote me on that. It might have been something, a different function. But the first thing we learn from that is it takes intelligence to be able to add information. It's not some random mutation. It actually takes intelligence to put it in, intelligent design, intelligent purpose, right? Yet, if you follow along with the experiment, when those wheat germs mated, or yeast, I don't know why I keep calling them wheat, but the yeast, when they mated and they reproduced, their offspring didn't keep the DNA that was put into them. So it just removed it through reproduction. And not only that, over time, those yeast germs there, they actually corrected their own DNA and removed what was added. So even with intelligent design and purpose, putting the new information in, it still self-corrected and removed it. So even putting something in intelligently, it self-corrects. So how the hell can you get from 21 base pairs to 100 to 1,000 to 1,000,000 to 1,000,000,000 if you can't add, and if anything added is either harmful to the creature or it's corrected, it's self-corrected, it just removes it. That's science. That's what we can observe. That's what we can experiment with and see the results. That's the science. Yet we can completely ignore science and go after imagination and speculation, and then we make fun of people with faith. And when it's you who have faith that this is what happened, because there's no evidence for it whatsoever. None. When we actually use science, what we see is that life only comes from life. Yet, the science wants to tell you that non-life produced life. This is not true. There's nothing scientific about that whatsoever. Have anybody ever observed life coming from something not living? Like life just spontaneously creating on your table or on the floor or even outside? I know the life's supposed to be something you can't see, like a DNA or a germ or something, but you think we could have experiment, right? Where we take some earth and some plants and we create a little biodome that we just constantly watching. We keep a meticulous record of everything in there and we keep studying to see new life forming, since that atmosphere can sustain life and obviously should be able to allow new life to form, right? But it never happens. Yet they give you abogenesis, and they create an atmosphere which they claim was how Earth used to be, uninhabitable. No life could survive on it because it was so harmful, right? They create that atmosphere and they strike it with electricity to act as lightning. And when they did this, they left out oxygen, just so you know, out of this fake atmosphere, an abogenesis. If you've ever heard of it, you can look it up. It's actually quite silly because you think you do an experiment where life can actually be sustained instead of an imaginary speculative world that you don't know even existed. Well, that's what they did. They just took this world how they think the world used to be, so uninhabitable, and they struck it with electricity, and they were able to create RNA, right? And you're like, whoa, the building blocks of life, right? Well, slow down here. We have to think about this because they created RNA, but there's a few problems. One is it was left-handed RNA. That's useless. Only right-handed RNA can be used to end up creating life. The second thing is that it quickly fell apart. So it put it together, but it quickly fell apart. They had to remove it from the atmosphere, from the harmful atmosphere that they created, to make sure that it didn't fall apart. So they had to protect it. We're showing that they used their own little intentional method to create it, and they also had to use intelligence and forethought to protect this RNA. Next thing, like I already said, they left out oxygen, which would have destroyed it. It would have just torn it apart. And the last thing is that if, say, we took these letters here, right? This says a sentence that you can understand. You can only have two things in life, reasons and results. Reasons don't count. I don't necessarily agree with that. I'm just taking this, right? Well, let's say we take all these letters, we just scramble them about, right? And we can slam on the table, and all the letters can end up eventually lining up together, right? One straight line of letters just by slamming on the table. It could happen eventually over time, right? Use your imagination. Let's speculate about it. That doesn't mean the words are going to make any sense whatsoever. It can just be like NCTWGXY WLNLLLWT. It doesn't make any sense in any language whatsoever. It's just gobbledygook, right? Not only that, you can have a lot of the letters upside down, sideways. So even if there was something to it, it still doesn't make sense because it's just you put it together, but it doesn't mean you put it together in a way that is useful. You get what I mean? So it's kind of like these are the building blocks, the letters, and you're banging the table is like when they tried to strike it with lightning. You put something together, but doesn't mean it's meaningful in any way whatsoever. Not to mention that this doesn't happen in our atmosphere right now that sustains life. There's not new life constantly forming. There's things that are dying off, and we see things that are actually falling apart. Because DNA, like I said, it's only scrambled or information is lost. It's never gained. So we actually see the opposite. And an improvement, no, we're seeing a downward spiral here going on. So life only comes from life, not from a rock and rain on it. No, that's not science. That's not something we can actually observe and experiment with and test. That's imagination, speculation. Just like this next thing, consciousness. Consciousness can only come from something conscious. A rock cannot produce something conscious. A pile of dirt, some minerals, a piece of wood. If it's not conscious, it cannot produce consciousness. Like you can produce a child that's alive and conscious. Why? Because you're alive and you're conscious. The same thing with a dog, a cat, right? So I hope you're putting this all together here. And maybe I wouldn't even have to continue with this. But I'm going to, because life cannot come from something that's not alive, and consciousness cannot come from something not conscious. You can speculate and imagine how it could or that maybe it did, but that's not science. That's not reality. Reality is what we can actually study with science that shows that life only comes from something living and that something conscious only comes from something conscious. Right? And I've already showed with DNA that it takes intelligence to put it together and to maintain it so that it doesn't fall apart. Right? It has to be held up. So this is where I want to get to this next thing here. These three are all connected. This one I just want to show to look this up. Impossible to have an infinite regress. You can look up these different articles in case the way I explain things are not simple enough, because I'm going to really just simplify things to make it easier for anybody to really grasp. Because if you really understand something, you're able to explain it simply that a child can understand it. So that's what I plan to do, so that even if you're a child, you can grasp this. I don't have to sit here with an ego going, you're just not smart enough to get what I'm saying. You need an education like me. You need to do this and that to be great like me and smart like me. No, we're all equal. That's something I should have said in the beginning, is that, we're all equal. We're all men and women, different ages, and no one's above us. And we shouldn't put ourselves below anybody. So somebody gets some PhD, a doctorate, and they put on a lab coat and they go on TV, that doesn't make what they say automatically true. It may make it where you're like, oh, I'll hear them out, because maybe they study this stuff. But it doesn't mean they don't have their own agenda, that they don't have their own bias, that they were fooled, that they were indoctrinated by school, or that they're just straight up lying. So you gotta think for yourself. You're just as capable as that person that you think is so smart on the television or in the college or whatever else. The only thing is that you doubt yourself. And hopefully this will lead you to God, and that's where you'll become real wise. So anyway, impossible to have an infinite regress. And even this guy, Aaron Ra, he's a big atheist guy on YouTube. Uh, he admitted this thing about the DNA where this actually tied into back here, so that kind of messed up. But it ties into the infinite regress because he said that the offspring cannot rise above the ancestry. And it ties into what I was saying. Like, this atheist admits that the DNA is not becoming more complex. Like, the offspring, like if he had children, cannot become more complex, have more information in DNA than him and his wife. It's impossible. And he can't have more DNA than his grandparents or great-grandparents. No, you can't rise above. You're either at the same level or below. That's it. And he admits that as he's doing a debate with Kent Hovind. He has 2 videos that I know of where he debates Kent Hovind on YouTube. So if you want to check that out, look up this guy, Aaron Ra, on YouTube. Like Aaron Ra debates Kent Hovind. That's I assume you know how to spell Kent with a K, and Hovind is Hovind. And it was interesting how he actually admitted that. I was like, you just refuted evolution. But anyway, he shows that since you can't rise above the ancestry, that ultimately there's a source. That's how we get into an infinite regress here. Because there's a source that had all the information in the DNA that can make up all the life that we see. Everything that we see, all the plants and insects, and fish and sea life, and land animals and people, all the information that makes up everything actually had a source. So yeah, you have DNA that can come out and speciate by loss of information. Right? You can branch off. You get all these different breeds of dogs. They're still dogs, you know, obviously just a modified wolf, and different breeds of cats and stuff like that, of horses. But you can tell they're the same animal. It's not rocket science, right? So the DNA can be changed, but it's a scrambling of the information that's there and a loss of information. So you can see it all spreading out. So they show this tree of life, like this evolution thing, and the actual source is God. Because not only does the source have to have all the information to make up everything, because the source is actually not the least complex, where it's only just like 10 base pairs of DNA. It's going to have all the base pairs ever. It's going to have all the information there is, because it's the only way to create what we have that we see falling apart. So the source has all the information to make up everything. That's at the root. Not only that, the root has to be alive to be able to produce something living. It also has to be conscious to be able to produce something conscious. So the source is alive, conscious, and contains all the information there is. That's God. And why do I bring up an infinite regress? Because it's impossible to have an infinite regress. You might even not even know what I'm talking about. Well, have you ever heard someone say, God created everything? And then somebody responds saying, well, who created God? And then who created that God? And then where did he come from? And where did he come from? And then where did he come from? Right? That's an impossibility. Because they just keep going backwards, right? Backwards and backwards and backwards, more and more. It's idiocy. It's stupid. It's just a way to ignore reality and just go after your own delusions and what you want to believe instead of reality. That's why these atheists, they're actually mentally ill. And they pretend to be smart. And what we see going on in the world right now is the lunatics are actually taking over and running the asylum. But anyway, to explain an infinite regress, right? If we just look at this clock, it really makes everything simple, right? Uh, we're going to say that everything starts here at 1, right? We'll say this is 0, and then boom, 1. We get things started, right? Well, we can't get to 2 until 1 happens, right? And let's say we are born at 10, right? We're born at 10. Well, you can't be born until 1 happens, right? Then 2 has to happen, then 3, then 4, then 5, then 6, then 7, then 8, then 9. Oh, boom, here you are, right? So you can look at this as your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, your great-great-grandparents, your great-great-great-grandparents, and so on. I don't know if I can remember all the greats, but you get the point, right? And then this would be your children and then your grandchildren, right? You can say the start of time and this is the end of time, right? Now, if there's an infinite regress, so then For 1 to happen, you need 0, right? But for 0 to happen, you need -1, -2, -3, -4, -5, and you can just keep going on forever. 1 never happens. Why? Because we need -10,000 to happen. But we can't have -10,000 yet because we need -1,000,000 to happen. And we can't get to there because we need -1,000,000,000 to happen. And we can't get to -1,000,000,000 because we need -1,000,000,000,000 to happen. And then we can't get to -1,000,000,000,000 because we need negative up team, let's just make up a huge number and we'll just keep going and going, right? So how can we get to here if there's a constant regress? There has to be a starting point. Boom, here's the start. Now we can actually move forward. Like Adam and Eve, and then the children. Boom, 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 boom. The first moment. Now we can have the next moment. Right? You can look at that as seconds. Like you're counting. You can't just go 10. You have to go 1, 2, 3. You have to go through the actual beginning to get to 10. Now that's the simplest way to put that. As far as I can know. Maybe you get a better way to put that. But it's real easy to grasp. Like if you had to go play hide and seek, and they're like, okay, count to 10, I'm going to go hide. But you can't start at 1 because you need to do -1, you need to do -2, -3, -4. You can never start because you have to go infinitely back. So you can never actually play the game. You can never actually get to 10 to actually go search and find your friend or your brother, your sister, whatever, your kid, right? So yeah, impossible to have an infinite regress. So there's an ultimate source, and that source contains, according to atheist Aaron Ra, according to the science of DNA, which he obviously knows about, this source contains all the information in the world. It is alive. It is conscious. It's God. And like I said in the beginning, trust the science. And that everything I'm showing here, I don't necessarily believe in. It's just some visual stuff for you to check out because I just basically talk. And it's probably a slight upgrade from looking at my ugly mug, so you're welcome. So anyway, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Think about this stuff. Please share. The country is becoming more and more godless, and the more godless we see it become, the more just degraded everything's becoming, and it's falling apart, and we're seeing freedom being thrown away, and people just going after fear and giving in to fear. It doesn't look good. So yeah, share this or take it in and digest it and break it down. Make your own video, your own blog. Make it so you can explain this to your friends, your family, that, yeah, God exists, and I don't need to just have faith that he exists. It's obvious that he exists. I have faith in God because I trust him. I don't have to have faith that he exists. Just trust that he exists. I know he exists. And now the rest of my videos can branch off from here. This will be the source. God. So anyway, thanks for watching and take care.